Your last name is not a label. It is a record. And for millions of Americans it is the only proof left that a Viking once stopped raiding and stayed. 1200 years ago longships hit the coast of England. Most people think the Vikings came, burned everything, took the gold and sailed home again. They did not. Thousands never left. They took land, took wives, and buried their fathers in English soil. And they left something behind that outlived every sword. Their names. Carried across the Atlantic centuries later, sitting on American mailboxes right now, and almost nobody who owns them knows what they mean. Here are 20 of them. And one name on this list is the strongest proof of Viking blood that exists, stronger than any DNA test. It is not the obvious one. We start with the most common one in America. Nearly 2 million people carry it. Johnson. And its structure is not English at all, it is Norse. The English named sons after trades. Baker. Smith. Fletcher. The Norse named sons after fathers. Son of Johann became Johansson, and Johansson became Johnson. This system is called a patronymic. Every generation got a brand new surname. Your father was Eric, you were Eriksson, your son was named after you instead. Scandinavia only froze these names in place in the 1800s. Before that a family could change its surname 3 times in a single century. So here is your first tell. If your name ends in son with a single S, your line most likely came through Norway. Double S points to Sweden. Anderson. Nearly 800,000 Americans. Same machinery, son of Anders. But Anders itself is a translation, and the original word is much older. Anders comes from Andreas, meaning manly. Norse settlers took the Christian name and forced it into their own grammar without changing how they thought. That is what makes these names such good evidence. Christianity changed what Vikings believed. It did not change how they built a family name. Anderson clusters hard in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Dakotas. That is not ancient history. That is the 1880s, and it matters for a reason. 2 different waves brought Norse names to America. One arrived 1,000 years ago through England. The other arrived on a steamship. Both count. Eriksson. Now the names get louder. Because Eric was not just a common name, it belonged to the most notorious family in the Norse world. Eric the Red was exiled from Norway for killing a man. Exiled again from Iceland for the same thing. So he sailed west, into water nobody had mapped. He found an island of rock and ice, and named it Greenland, pure marketing, so settlers would follow him. Hundreds did. It worked. His son Leif went further. 500 years before Columbus, Leif Erikson stood on North American soil. If you are an Eriksson, that is your name. Watch the spelling. Eriksson with AC is usually American respelling. Eriksson with double S is the untouched original that never got anglicized. Knutson. Rarer, and far more serious. Because Canute was not a farmer's name. It belonged to a man who took the English throne outright. In 1016, Knut the Great became King of England. Not a raider. Not a warlord in the north. The crowned and anointed king of the whole country. He then took Denmark and Norway too, and ruled all 3 at once. For 19 years the North Sea was effectively one single Viking empire. Canute means knot. A tight, bound, unbreakable thing. Norse parents chose names as instructions for the child, not as decoration. That is the pattern to hold on to. Norse names are always instructions. Which is exactly why the next 4 names should frighten you slightly. Thurston. Say it slowly and you will hear it. Thor. Stone. This name is not near the god of thunder. It is built out of him. In Old Norse it was Thorstein. Thor's stone. And a stone was not a decoration, it was the hardest, most permanent thing a family could own. Parents were not naming a baby. They were making a claim on the strongest god they knew, and asking him to hold that child down like bedrock. Thurston survives all over England today, thickest in the east, exactly the strip of coast the Danish armies took and held for 2 centuries. That region had a name, the Danelaw. Remember it. Half the surnames left in this video come out of that one piece of ground. Thorbjorn. Same god, different animal. Thorbjorn in Old Norse, Thor's bear. And the Norse did not use the word bear lightly. Bear names went to a specific kind of man. The one you put in the front line. The one you did not expect to see come back in one piece. This is where the word berserker comes from. Berserker, bear shirt. Warriors who fought in animal skins and, by every account, felt no pain. Scotland kept Thorbjorn best, in the border country. That is not a coincidence. Norse fleets worked the Scottish coast for 300 years. If your family came to America from the Scottish borders and carries this name, your line ran through Norse hands long before it ran through British ones. Osborne. This one hides better. It looks completely English. It is not. In Old Norse it was Asbjorn, and the first half means God. Not a god. The gods. The Aesir, Odin, Thor, Frigg, the whole ruling family of Asgard packed into 2 letters at the front of your name. So Osborne does not mean bear of a god. It means the divine bear. Whoever named that child was aiming as high as their religion allowed. The Normans then carried it into England a second time in 1066, and the Normans themselves were Vikings who had settled in France. That is the detail most people miss entirely. England was not invaded by Vikings once. It was invaded by Vikings twice, from 2 different directions. Grimes. Short, plain, forgettable. And it comes from Grim, one of the private names Odin used when he did not want to be recognized. Grimr means the masked one. Odin wandered the world disguised as an old traveler, testing people who had no idea who they were feeding. A child given that name was pointed at the god of wisdom, war, and poetry. All 3 at once. And at his habit of never showing his real face. Grimes is dense in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, the absolute core of the Danelaw, where Norse settlers outnumbered the English population outright. So far every name came from a father or a god. The next 4 came from something far more personal, what the man himself actually was. Swain. In Old Norse, Svein. It meant a young man attached to a warband, not yet a landowner, not yet anybody, but already armed. These were the men who filled the ships. Second sons with no inheritance, nothing to lose, and one route to land, take somebody else's. That single fact explains the Viking age better than any legend. Norse farms could not be divided. One son got everything. The rest got a boat. Sweyn Forkbeard carried the name and took the English crown in 1013. He held it 5 weeks, died, and handed the whole thing to his son Nut. So if you are a Sweyn, your name did not belong to a king. It belonged to the men who put kings on thrones. Men nobody ever bothered to write down. Gun. 3 letters, and every one of them is a weapon. Gunr in Old Norse means battle. Not fighter. Not soldier. Battle itself. Gunr was also the name of a Valkyrie. One of the women who chose which men died. And who carried the worthy ones up to Odin's hall. Clan Gunn in the far north of Scotland traces itself to a Norse chieftain. Their own tradition does not claim Scottish descent. It claims Viking descent. Northern Scotland was not really Scottish then. Orkney, Shetland and Caithness answered to Norway for 600 years, not to any Scottish king. They were only handed to Scotland in 1468. As part of a dowry. Because a Danish king could not pay his own daughter's wedding bill. Story. Nothing to do with stories. It comes from story, and it was a nickname that meant, very simply, the big one. Norse society ran on nicknames because the pool of real names was tiny. In one village you might find 6 men all legitimately called Thorstein. So they labeled each other. The big one. The bald one. The one who talks too much. And those labels hardened into the surnames people carry now. Some were brutal. Harold Bluetooth. Ivar the Boneless. Eystein Foulfart. These are not jokes, they are recorded in the official royal sagas. And yes, Bluetooth. The wireless standard is named after a Viking king, and its logo is his initials written in actual Norse runes. Gamble. Nothing to do with betting. It comes from gamal, which simply meant old, and in that world old was an achievement. Most Norse men who took up raiding did not reach 40. Reaching 60 meant you had survived the sea, the wars, the winters, and the infections. So the name was respect, not description. Calling a man Gamal meant everyone in that hall knew he had outlived people who tried to kill him. Gamble concentrates in Cumbria and Lancashire, northwest England, which was settled not from Denmark but by Norwegians coming through Ireland. Every name so far describes a person. The next 4 describes something that cannot move, cannot die, and is still sitting there on the map today. Thorpe. In Old Norse, Thorpe, a small outlying settlement, built away from the main village, usually on land nobody had bothered to farm. This is the single most useful word in the whole video. Because a place name is physical evidence. It sits on the ground and it does not lie. England has over 300 settlements ending in Thorpe. Scunthorpe. Cleatharps. Bishopthorpe. Every single one marks a spot where Norse settlers built. Add the other Norse endings, by, Toft, Thwaite, and you get well over 800 villages. That is not a raid. That is an occupation. If your surname is Thorpe, an ancestor did not just visit England. He was named after the piece of ground his family cleared and kept. Booth. From Norse booth, a temporary shelter. A hut you put up for one season and expected to take down again afterwards. It was built for summer grazing high in the hills, then abandoned when the snow came. Except in a lot of places it never got abandoned. Somebody stayed through one winter. Then a second. The temporary shelter became a farm, the farm became a family, the family became a surname. Booth is heaviest in Yorkshire and Lancashire, and it traveled to America early. Booths were in New England by the 1600s. Which means this name crossed 2 frontiers. Norway to England as a hill shelter. England to America as a family. Same word, both times. Beck. From Beck, a stream. And this one is the cleanest test in the entire English language for where the Norse actually lived. Because England already had a word for stream. Brook. Anglo-Saxon, older, perfectly good. The 2 words split the country almost exactly in half. Draw a line where people stop saying brook and start saying beck. You have just drawn the border of Viking England. Without opening a history book. It is still there. Today, in Yorkshire and Cumbria, a stream is a beck. 200 miles south, the identical stream is a brook. 1,000 years after the last longship rotted, the water is still telling you who used to own the valley. Names outlast absolutely everything. Holm. From Holmer, a small island, or a patch of dry raised ground standing above marshland that floods every single year. Dry ground in a wet country was worth more than gold. Whoever held the holm controlled the crossing, the grazing and everyone else's route. There was also home gang, island going. A legal duel fought on an islet, because once you were there neither man could walk away. It was a real legal procedure. Property disputes, insults, inheritance, all of it could be settled by 2 men and one very small piece of land. 4 names left. And these are the ones nobody suspects, including the single strongest piece of evidence in the entire list. Rogers. Possibly the most ordinary surname in America. Nearly 400,000 people. And it is Norse to the bone. The original is Hrothgeir. 2 words welded together, fame, and spear. The famous spear. A name built entirely out of violence and reputation. It reached England twice. Once with Norse settlers directly, and again with the Normans, who had carried it to France and softened the sound. Watch what happened to it. Hrothgar became Roger in France, then Roger in England, then Rogers when the English added their possessive s. That is why these names hide so well. 1,000 years of mouths wore the edges off until the word looked like it had always been English. Lund. From Lundr, a grove of trees. That sounds gentle. It was not. A Lundr was where the old religion actually happened. Before churches, the Norse worshipped outdoors. Sacred groves held the altars, the offerings, and according to the chroniclers, the sacrifices. German chronicler Adam of Bremen described one at Uppsala where bodies of men and animals hung in the trees for 9 days every 9th year. 9 mattered enormously. 9 worlds, 9 nights Odin hung on the world tree to win the runes. The number runs through everything they believed. So a family called Lund was not named after scenery. They were named after the place their community went to meet its gods. Gill. 2 letters short of nothing, and there is a trap in it. Some Gills are Irish, from Mac Gialla. But in northern England it is pure Norse. Norse Gill meant a narrow ravine with water at the bottom. Cut deep, steep on both sides, hard to cross and easy to defend. The Lake District is covered in them. Dungeon Gill. Sour Milk Gill. Names given by Norwegian settlers who thought those hills looked like home. That detail is worth pausing on. They did not pick England's best farmland. They picked the fells, the fjord-shaped valleys, the ground that reminded them of Norway. Which tells you these were not raiders looking for loot. These were families looking for somewhere to live permanently. And that changes the last name completely. Which brings us to the last name. Haldane. Rare, quiet, and it is the strongest proof of Viking descent on this entire list. In Old Norse it is Halfdan. And it does not describe a god, a weapon, a farm, or a father. It describes a percentage. Half. Dane. It literally means half Danish, a child with one Norse parent and one who was not. It is a record of the mixing itself. Every other name proves a Viking passed through. This one proves a Viking stayed, married a local woman, and had a child who was written down. That is the moment the bloodline actually begins. Not a battle. Not a raid. A marriage nobody recorded, remembered only because they named the child after it. So here is the answer to the question at the start. The strongest evidence is not the loudest name. Not Thor. Not Odin. Not a king. It is the quiet one that admits it is only half. Because a raider leaves a story behind him. A settler leaves a grandchild who carries your name today. Check your own name against this list. And if you want to know which American surnames hide Celtic blood instead, that video is waiting for you now.